The film opens with a nightmare that keeps haunting a woman named Jane. Jane is a patient at a hospital for people suffering from depression. Every time she faces a problem, Jane always has the urge to end her life. Jane has been treated there for 1 year, and because her condition is considered to be improving, she is finally allowed to go home. However, that night, Jane secretly sneaks into a pharmacy. It's unclear what she is planning, but she takes various kinds of medicine from the place. The next day, Jane gathers with her friends, and they share stories about their personal problems. From there, it is revealed that Jane comes from a family with a history of suicide. Not only her grandmother, but her father also died the same way right in front of her eyes. That series of events greatly affected Jane's mental condition and became the main reason she was hospitalized there.
Everything okay? Did you want to say something?
Gonna miss your faces.
After saying goodbye to her friends, Jane heads to the airport. Jane has actually already planned something to end her life, because it turns out she hasn't truly recovered and is still constantly haunted by her past. Upon arriving at the airport, Jane meets a man named Paul. Even though it's their first time meeting, Paul seems to show extra attention toward Jane. Meanwhile, Jane acts friendly and sweet, as if hiding the big plan she intends to carry out later on the plane.
Gosh,
You gotta
powder all over.
Sometime later, Jane boards the plane while the sky is overcast. By coincidence, Paul gets a seat right next to her, and they start talking and sharing stories with each other.
That's what rationalists
Myself, but
I am.
When the plane is already in the air, Jane writes a letter to Paul. In the letter, Jane thanks Paul for being her last person to talk to.
Life that's as good as
After finishing, Jane slips the letter into Paul's pocket, then walks toward the restroom to carry out her plan. Without Jane expecting it, something happens on the plane. Even so, it doesn't stop Jane's intention. Inside the restroom, Jane takes out the medicine she stole and gets ready to take them all at once. But right before Jane does it, the plane experiences heavy turbulence, causing a flight attendant to come and tell her to return to her seat. Not long after that, the plane Jane is on crashes in a remote mountain area. Sometime after the crash, Jane, who is still in the restroom, finally regains consciousness and realizes the plane has been destroyed. Jane immediately comes out and sees many victims who are already dead or badly injured. Suddenly, Jane hears someone calling for help. It turns out to be Paul, who is still alive. Safely, the two of them become the only ones who survive the crash. Now, they have to face extremely cold temperatures. They then head to the tail section of the plane and use it as shelter. There, Paul checks his body and realizes that his ribs are broken. But since there's nothing that can be done, they can only help each other stay warm in the middle of the snowstorm. The next day, Jane goes out to check the surroundings. Jane is shocked when she sees so many bodies scattered around. Jane doesn't understand. People who wanted to live ended up dying, while she, who wanted to die, actually survived the incident. Not long after that, Paul asks Jane to leave the crash site immediately. Paul is very shocked when Jane admits that the reason she got on the plane was actually to end her life. Jane even intends to stay there and freeze to death. Hearing that, Paul is shocked and tries to snap Jane out of it, then forces her to pack up right away. Because Paul keeps pushing, Jane finally goes along with him.
Go back to the plane.
However, after reaching the plane wreckage, Jane changes her mind again and wants to stay. Paul tries to convince Jane that if they stay there, the chances of being found will be small, especially since a snowstorm is coming, and will make it even harder for the rescue team to look for them. While Jane is still being stubborn, Paul finally decides to leave on his own, saying that if Jane stays there, she will die alone and no one will ever find her body. Seeing that Paul really leaves, Jane finally follows him while carrying a shard of glass, still intending to continue her bad plan. They walk through the freezing snow. After walking for quite a while, they suddenly reach a dead end with no other path. Paul then asks Jane to climb down the cliff in front of them.
Okay.
The farther they walk, the steeper the path becomes, making Jane start to doubt following Paul. Not long after that, they truly reach an end that can't be passed.
Watch your feet here. Yes, you can. Yes, you can do it. You can do it.
Paul then comes up with an idea to jump onto a tree below them, and he tries to convince Jane to follow his way. After seeing Paul jump first, Jane, who has no other choice, finally gathers the courage to jump as well. Luckily, both of them survive. While helping Jane stand up, Paul finds a bottle of medicine and asks about it. Jane explains that the medicine was actually prepared to end her life on the plane. Paul becomes even more curious about Jane's desire to still want to die, but he doesn't want to drag the argument out. Paul asks Jane to continue the journey because the snowstorm is getting closer. In the middle of their journey, Paul finds a cave and decides they should rest there. But suddenly, an avalanche happens, forcing them to save themselves immediately. Unfortunately, Jane gets swept away by the snow and buried. Paul, who manages to survive, immediately tries to help her. He digs through the pile of snow with all his strength at the last place he saw Jane. Paul finally manages to find Jane unconscious and immediately carries her into the cave. After several hours pass, Jane finally wakes up and immediately thanks Paul for saving her. Paul then honestly says that he has actually liked Jane since the first time they met. Paul even deliberately switched plane tickets so he could sit next to Jane. Seeing how kind Paul is, Jane finally tells him about the incident that has been haunting her all this time. Back when Jane was 10 years old, she once heard a gunshot in her house. It turned out her father ended his life with a gun. Jane saw the bullet hole clearly, and since then, the image of that event has never truly disappeared from her memory. Paul stays silent hearing the story, not expecting Jane to have gone through such a tragic childhood.
I miss that. Lift me up and let me put the star. You should.
In the middle of their conversation, Paul starts to feel intense pain in his ribs. The injury Paul has turns out to be getting worse, making him start to feel hopeless. The situation flips this time. Jane is the one trying to give Paul hope and keeps encouraging him to hold on and survive. The next day, the storm has passed, and the weather looks clear. They continue their journey, even though Paul is still injured. Step by step, they move forward together. Every now and then they stop briefly to catch their breath, then walk again. They can't rest for too long because they have no food, so they have to keep moving before their condition gets worse. Paul says they need to reach the valley as soon as possible because there's usually a river there, and the river's flow will likely lead to a settlement. But at one point, while Paul is observing the surroundings, something unexpected happens. Paul falls and gets injured again, making it feel like his bones are broken. Jane immediately rushes to help him. In a panic, Jane grabs tree branches and tries to wrap and support the injured part. Luckily, Paul's leg can still be used, so they are able to keep going. They continue walking downhill until later in the afternoon. They decide to stop and spend the night there. In that place, Jane truly begins to feel the meaning of the struggle to survive. Jane is very grateful she met Paul, and in her heart, Jane is determined to start valuing her own life. The next day, they continue their journey again, but both of their conditions start to worsen because there is no food. The pain Paul is suffering also gets more severe. They feel extremely weak and almost unable to walk anymore. Seeing Paul suffer more and more, Jane finally decides to go look for help as quickly as possible. Jane looks at Paul with deep emotion, as if it will be their last meeting. With teary eyes, Jane starts walking away from him. After walking for quite a long time, instead of finding help right away, Jane is confronted by a wolf and place. Jane tries to stay calm, but suddenly, the animal starts chasing her. Luckily, Jane manages to survive by using the shard of glass she had been carrying earlier, even though her hand gets injured. Jane then keeps walking to find help, and not long after that, she finally finds a river, along with a highway. Sometime later, Jane is successfully rescued and immediately taken to the hospital while half-conscious. During the entire trip, Jane keeps saying Paul's name and asks the rescue team to help him right away. 2 days later, Jane finally wakes up and sees her mother already by her bedside. Her mother looks very happy because Jane survived the tragic accident. Jane immediately asks about Paul's condition, whom she left alone on the mountain. Her mother says that Paul has been found by the rescue team, but he is still unconscious. Her mother also gives Jane a letter written by Paul. In the letter, Paul writes that he is deeply impressed by Jane's spirit to survive, even though their situation at the time felt almost impossible to survive.
You live a life good enough for the both of us.
Several months later, both of them have recovered to their normal condition. The two of them return to visit the place that almost took their lives. There, they promise to live life together and eventually get married. The story ends.